This house is a cradle of our dreams, a workshop for our common endeavor. The last 8 days in this congregation have been remarkable. This congregation truly have been living by the principles outlined on the back of your orders of services. A week ago Saturday, we affirmed and promoted the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Earth Day celebration here was the 7th principle in action, with over 400 visitors and 70 volunteers. We're at our fellowship, persevering through the rain and honoring the earth. This past Thursday, we affirmed and promoted justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. This congregation sponsored a showing of a movie, The Many Trials of Darrell Hunt. In addition to our financial support, I saw many of you in the theater. This racially charged case has divided this city for over 20 years, and over 1,300 people came together across the racial chasm and reflected upon the effects of racism upon this city's judicial system. And our name was proclaimed from the stage of the Stevens Center as an organization sponsoring this. Friday night, we promoted the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We also financially sponsored and had volunteers at the alternative prom for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered teens and their straight friends. I saw kids celebrating themselves and each other, and we have been long a leader in this community, providing a safe place for sexual minorities and working with other churches and organizations who support this civil rights struggle. We certainly do live the principle of acceptance of one another, and this spiritual practice encourages our spiritual growth. Our eyes are not downcast on the outcast. We always need to continue to work on the idea that inclusion means full inclusion. I saw teens of all races and sexual orientations embracing each other, literally. Some of the dancing has changed since I was a kid. And tonight, we will affirm and promote the use of the democratic process in our congregations and society at large. We're sending a delegation to the Change meeting, and more are always welcome. And we're joining with others across racial and religious lines, building relationships by working on the common good we can all agree on: health care, livable wages, equitable schools. Come and see this. It's a remarkable thing to be in the room with this many people across from all areas of Winston-Salem. It's just remarkable. I'm making a quote book this summer, and so I like slogans, little pithy sayings. And I know some slogans about religious integrity. Put your money where your mouth is. Practice what you preach. Deeds, not creeds. These are neat slogans, but for this fellowship, they are more than slogans. They are reality. I am so proud to be associated with such a fine group of people. I mean, we did 5 principles in 8 days, public displays. And the 2 remaining, I'm sure, have been part of your private practice. I'm certain that many of you in the past week have made a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And I know some of you have promoted the goal of world community with peace and liberty and justice for all. I read some of the last emails on those topics that I'll be reading for about 5 months. It's important for Unitarian Universalism to have an institutional presence in this town. When I introduce myself as your minister, people usually smile and say something positive. When I go to a social action or cultural event or to Borders, I always see you. I've been here 6 years and I've seen several types of growth. Numerical and financial growth are the most obvious, but institutional growth is another. People know us. I imagine them thinking, I want to do something progressive in Winston-Salem. I better get the UUs to help me. Now that means that people have expectations of us, and with expectations come responsibilities. It's harder to hide when you have an institutional presence. It's safer to be a secret society of religious liberals. But we have been building up an institutional presence, and we have expectations to live up to. That can be difficult. But it is better than people saying, well, those UUs talk a good game, but they never show up. People are taking us seriously because we take ourselves seriously. People are taking us seriously because we are taking ourselves seriously. It is an important indicator of a mature congregation. We're no longer struggling to survive, worrying only about attendance and finances. We not only look inward at our health, but we look for ways to share our strength with the community. Growing in numbers and wealth are examples of vertical growth. Social action as an institution is an example of our growing breadth. Which brings me to the topic of my sermon, what I want you to do on your summer vacation from me. During my sabbatical, I want you to join me in growing in depth, looking at our roots, what holds our vertical growth and our horizontal growth. I'll be exploring UU history, looking for words from our past that have meaning for our future. I'll be returning to the well of learning, rediscovering why I cast my lots with Unitarian Universalists, why I chose this path to fulfill my spiritual needs. That's what I want you to do on your summer vacation from me. To grow in depth. Rediscover why you personally are a Unitarian Universalist. I ask you to do this while I'm away because I know I can't do it for you. So it'll be easier when I'm not here distracting you from your own search. Ministers can be helpful to congregations from time to time. They bring a focus to the ministry of the congregation. The diffuse light of a gathering of people is passed through the magnifying glass of the minister to light the flame of the chalice of freedom. But from time to time, it's good to take the focus off the minister and return to the sources of light. The source of light in this congregation lies in your hopes and your aspirations. A congregation goes through several phases as it grows: independence, dependence, and interdependence. In the beginning, A few strong-willed, independent people is all that's needed. Someone thinks of something and it gets done. It is the age of initiative. It's an exciting time in the life of a congregation. Anything can happen, and usually did. Talk to some of our older members. They have great stories. But as a congregation grows, it gets harder to do. Too many independent people going in too many directions and doing their own thing wears people out. And so eventually a group that is growing will seek a professional minister. Rather than the scurrying of individuals, the movement gets synchronized and rolls like a wheel with the minister at the hub. And this is the dependent stage. The minister is at the center and kind of connected to everything. But the wheel grows bigger and bigger, and it becomes unwieldy. Think of a nimble unicycle. And all of a sudden the wheel keeps growing and growing and growing. And all of a sudden you can barely reach the pedals. And you might cobble on a little wheel on the back and you'll have one of those silly old-timey bicycles. But that really doesn't work so well. And so you have to figure out a new way to do things. That the minister as a hub no longer works. You need to add a second wheel that's about the same size and chains and gears, and the minister as the hub no longer works because he can't be in 4 or 5 places at one time. So the minister has to change and become more like the grease that is connected and helps all those wheels turn. The sabbatical offers us a chance to retool and prepare for interdependence. Interdependence, that more complex turning of wheels and gears. In the independent stage, the entire church resides in each individual. When there was 12 people here, everybody did everything. Everybody took their turn preaching, everybody took their turn serving coffee, everybody took their turn doing everything. In the dependent stage, there's some specialization which the minister kind of holds together until that no longer works. Interdependence takes more work. Each person has to be clear about where they fit in this complex system. It requires more depth, more self-awareness about who one is and what one is good at. In the beginning of a fellowship, the main requirement for leadership is having a warm body. And if your warm body is slow enough, you'll be elected president. But with interdependence, the work takes more planning than it used to, more specialization. And I know that this congregation can do it. This past year, I saw you plan the Fall Leadership Conference and Earth Day. And this was organization on a grand scale. And amazingly, I did less work than I did for other smaller events. I did not feel like I personally was spinning out of control because there were many wheels turning, and I was just greasing those wheels and letting them fly. It's different for me. Ministers like to be in control and the center of attention. The idea of the seduction of I get to stand up in front of people and have them pay attention to me for an hour each week? All right, I'm there. Arvid Straub, who was a long time minister over at Eno River, took their church from about 100 people to about 600 people. And he said, as we grew as a minister, I had to learn and work harder at doing less and less. Being less the go-to guy, less the person that does everything, and more the person that trusts and nurtures all those wheels of leadership within a congregation. So this time of sabbatical, it's a time for each of you and myself to examine ourselves, asking, what is my passion for Unitarian Universalism? And where does that lead me? What part do I play and where do I fit? This is about radical inclusion. Both big wheels and small wheels are needed. And we each turn on our own axis, an axis of giving and receiving. If you take a wheel and you pick a point on the top of the wheel, sometimes you're at the top and sometimes it rolls around and you're on the bottom. Sometimes we are the driving wheel and sometimes we are driven. We rotate through these periods of giving and receiving over and over. And the trick is to remain in motion. This summer, think, what do I give to Unitarian Universalism? What do I receive? We often think only about the giving part. We have workshops about how to volunteer and how to structure committees and how to do. And volunteering and the giving is only part of the wheel. I think of the care committee, and I have seen them joyous at the opportunity to help. There is a deep need in people to give, but they can only give if people are willing to receive. The self-sufficient person does not need community. In fact, they throw a wrench in the whole operation. They say, oh, I lost my job 3 months ago, and now I have a new one. That's my joy, but we might not ever hear of the concern when we can help each other out. We need to look at our vulnerabilities as well as our strengths. UUs have this Emersonian sense of self-reliance, an aspiration towards competence. But if we pretend that we don't have needs, they never get met. So it requires being vulnerable with each other. When we open ourselves to our own needs and ask for help and rely on each other, and when other people rely on us, we find that we have strengths that we never knew we had. A sabbatical time is a vulnerable time. Ministers get nervous because two things can happen in our paranoid minds. A, things will go terrible and people will be angry at me for abandoning them. Or things could go well and they discover they don't need me. But that anxiety is a good place to be. That place where we say, what does this congregation mean to me? How do I fit? How do I become a new minister who is grease of the many wheels that will be spinning when I come back? If I come back from a sabbatical and say, here I am, ready to be your hub, and you got a whole new bike and going down the road, it's not going to work. But we live with that anxiety during the sabbatical. That's part of the point of a sabbatical. That being placed in a different situation, it shakes us from our comfort zone. It is when we are in this vulnerable place that we have the chance to discover what Unitarian Universalism really means to us. The roles we play are not the only roles we can play. We are always free to choose how we will be in community. When I am gone, focus on yourselves. Focus on each other. Think of what you give and receive from this community. Cherish this community. Come as often as you can. Get to know the fellowship and yourselves in a new way. I will most likely be sitting in front of a computer screen in the mornings. But in the afternoon, I'll be by the pool.